So welcome back to the third module of the Confidence in the Cloud for IT Professional MBA course. And this next one, we're going to talk about risk, trust, and confidence, which really, what risks are there? What can you do about them? And trust and confidence kind of goes hand in hand. So John, what are we looking at?
You know, business is all about managing risk. You know, how do you have confidence that your business is going to be successful, and how do you manage your customer base, the cash flows, and all those things? And so when we talk to senior level executives about moving and changing the way that they do IT, well, risk, trust, and confidence are key issues that come up. And it is a top leadership concern. So I know that it says it should be a top leadership concern. Senior leaders are concerned about managing risk in the connected world.
Well, isn't that one of the reasons why we looked at earlier that they are not looking at cloud is because they lack that confidence and they...
You know, they're exactly right, and they're bombarded by messages every day. So if you look at Mandiant, they suggest that, Mandiant is a security and analytics firm. They suggest that hackers are on systems 243 days before they're seen, before they're detected. Ponemon Institute, which is a privacy firm in the U.S., estimates that the average cost of a data breach is $3.5 million, and it's increasing year on year. And that's important because it seems that we can't turn around on a daily basis that we hear about another breach or another exposure or data spillage of personal data.
Yeah, getting letters at home. I got a letter at home not too long ago from a retailer saying that they had been breached and that they were offering me kind of like a LifeLock kind of identity protection services for free for X amount of years because my information was on there.
You know, customers are important to those businesses, and they want to maintain that customer confidence. And we see that repeatedly as customers feel that they don't have confidence in a retailer, they go elsewhere. And so that has a huge impact on productivity and growth. And the McKinsey firm did that analysis to suggest it's $3 trillion hit on productivity and growth. So these things weigh heavily on the mind of a CEO. So as you can imagine, as they're trying to fall asleep at night, they're thinking about the implications about their job security. And we've seen some CEOs have to step down because of breaches. Legal liability, intellectual property, brand reputation. These things go through their heads as they're considering what that next move is as they move their business into this electronic age.
Yeah, and all these considerations, all these implications lead us to the next point, which are, what are those trust points?
You know, there's a number of considerations around trust in the cloud. You know, is cloud computing secure? What are those safeguards that people put in place? You know, where is the data? Do I have access? Who owns the data? Does privacy mean the same thing in the cloud as it means for my business locally? Is my data reused? Do they scan my data for advertising? You know, how do you meet the compliance requirements? What compliance requirements have you implemented? And finally, how do I have confidence that you're going to do everything you say you do?
Yeah, and we've already covered that in the second modules in terms that you own your data. We don't scan it. Your compliance is your own, and we are true to our promise to say we're not doing anything with that data other than what you have.
You're exactly right. And so as we've made this transition to the cloud, Microsoft has taken those lessons we've learned on our journey of trustworthy computing, which is now in its 12th year, around cybersecurity and making sure we have world-class security techniques that are built in from design through to deployment and through operations. We've included privacy within that process so that you're assured that we've looked at the privacy requirements for personal data and your customer data. So that includes all the data associated with your access to make sure that you're comfortable with how that information's managed and how that we're not reusing that for advertising. Compliance. Different customers have different compliance requirements. The healthcare community has a certain set of standards. The financial services community has a certain set of standards. What we've done is we've taken a worldwide view of how we deliver our cloud services, but they're informed by local policy. And so, for example, when you look at our Office 365, it has compliance to the Canadian Personal Information Protection Electronic Documents Act. And so if you're bound by that requirement internationally, then you can say, look, Office 365 meets those requirements for consent, choice, and notice. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, it's around transparency, providing people access and knowledge of what's happening. So being able to share things like our audit reports, letting people know about how we provide their services, providing access to information around those lawful access requests and things like that. So being very transparent about how we provide those services.
So that last one is if the RCMP or any law enforcement agency comes up with a warrant, because they can't get to without actually being lawful and backed by some kind of court order, I assume.
That's right.
But then before anything is done, the customer is informed of those steps.
So that's a commitment we've made, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the session. But enterprise customer data is our customers' data. We don't provide access to that data. So the first thing that we do is we redirect that request back to the customer and say, look, get the information from the data owners of that information. And we'll talk more about how that's actually executed in that part of this section. But on the transparency side, where we can, we provide as much information around the types of requests we receive and the number of requests that we actually satisfy. It's not as if every request gets satisfied. Some are ambiguous, some are vague, and we turn those away. We have a lot of experience in addressing these types of requests, and I've worked closely with law enforcement to make sure that there aren't these phishing expeditions.
So we have made a big commitment in protecting customer data and customer privacy.
We've made a huge commitment over the years, and we've reinforced that commitment in recent times. So first off, we have built a culture of security and privacy throughout the entire organization. This journey of trustworthy computing that transformed us from shipping a product first and foremost as soon as we thought it was finished to being thoughtful about how we apply security and privacy practices throughout the life cycle of our products, online services and our packaged software, and then having that formal sign-off before products are shipped to the marketplace. So that permeates our environment. Each and every one of our developers has to go through mandatory trustworthy computing or security development lifecycle processes and sign off every year. We also build that into our platform and our tools and techniques. And lastly, we proactively fight cybercrime. So not only do we build out these tool sets within our product sets, we recognize it's not just us that can do this alone. And so we partner with leading law enforcement, government policymakers, so that we can be proactive in this regard. And we can explain this now within our cloud services environment of how we've transitioned from the packaged software and implemented some of these tool sets, all of these tool sets within our online services world.
And that kind of drives the trust that we can have in our data centers.
Exactly. And so as we build out the data centers, we recognize that trust and confidence in how we provide the services is paramount for our customers. And so as we build out our online services, we make sure that we have a large defense in depth model that we're able to build out from the physical security perspective all the way from even vehicle encumbrances at the perimeters to our data centers, so that there are man traps so that you can't simply drive in. We have ISO certified man traps at some of these environments. We have no loan zones. We have data centers within data centers. So from the physical world all the way through to the virtual world. We have least privilege for each of our administrators. And as we talked about in the previous section, you work at the lowest level of permission until you require escalation or elevation of your administrative capabilities. And when you get that administrative escalation, it's a manual process, and it's ruthlessly audited. And every time you go up, you need to get manual approvals.
And the thing that I did the best about that is that you can't elevate yourself.
Correct.
So unless somebody's going to compromise the entire staff of the data center, they can't.
That's exactly right. So these manual processes make sure that there's not a single point of failure and a single point of exploitation, so that you have that confidence. And they're time bound, and some of these capabilities are adding additional assurance that the malicious users won't have a window of opportunity to be able to exploit them. We've also implemented a variety of compliance requirements that match those requirements of you, the customers. So things like the ISO 27001 security management practices, and being able to have a third-party auditor audit against those safeguards, those obligations, and then be able to share that out, often under NDA, but share that out so that people can go through and see what we've done. The same thing with the SSE 16, SOC 1 and SOC 2 audit reports. For those organizations where those audits are important.
So you've mentioned a whole bunch of numbers, and I'm an IT professional, and what does that actually mean?
So these are commonly recognized standards of the audit community that define what are some of the controls, what are some of the safeguards that need to be put in place in order to adequately protect environments. So a control might be there is a security policy. It's a written security policy. There's regular training and awareness, and it's enforced. And so that might be one portion that's required. Background checks of individuals might be another requirement. Least privilege is another requirement. And so essentially it's a checklist of requirements of how best to apply security safeguards within a cloud services environment. And often for operations in highly regulated environments, financial services, energy, governments, you require those types of approvals in order to operate to make sure that you're doing things properly.
Okay.
And so we're trying to make it as seamless as possible, as transparent as possible to move from a customer's on-premise regulated environment to one that they entrust to us where we have the same certifications and regulations.
Okay.
So it's a regular process that people can have comfort that, look, from a technology, operations, and process perspective, they are doing everything according to the best practice.
Okay, and we're in Canada, but I assume that this is not a purely Canadian thing or a U.S. thing. This is a global thing, correct?
It's a global thing, and for example, I think one of the great examples that we have is here in the European Union. They have a community of data protection authorities, and it's Working Party 29 in the European government has recently certified Microsoft's cloud services as being compliant with the Data Protection Authority privacy regulations in the EU. And we're the sole organization to have that certification, which means that, hey, people can have confidence in the legal requirements, legal contracts between themselves and their cloud provider.
And I understand that the European Union is one of the strictest regulation or in the world, correct?
That's right. They have the most strict requirements and the most explicit legal requirements written around privacy. Canada has a policy-based environment, principle-based environment, so a little bit more flexibility than the European Union. So if you have the strict compliance from the Europe, Canada's principle-based approach complies quite well with that.
Okay, and you said we're the only ones that have that?
That's right.
We win. Okay, sorry. Little outburst. So we have our certification, we are trusted and everything else. That's the legal end, and then what about the ethical end of things?
Well, it's all about how you handle individuals' data and how you comply with requests.
Okay.
And so one of the things that we feel passionately about is that the data is always your data. And so enterprise customers control their data, and we don't allow other people access to that data. And so we've gone so far to say that where there are legal requests with gag orders, we're going to fight those gag orders in court. And so recently there have been cases where law enforcement has asked us for data. We've contested that in the courts, and the law enforcement has withdrawn those requests for the data. You may have heard about a request for data out of our data centers in Ireland. And we've also blocked that request. We've said, look, this is not our data in our control. This is customer data, and you should go to the customer for that. And we continue to have that conversation in the courts in the U.S. to block that access to data. So it's something we're very, very passionate about. We continue to work with the governments so that they would use multilateral legal assistance treaties. So that are the requests that exist today between governments so that law enforcement agencies can provide assistance when you have cross-border incidents.
So the Patriot Act is not the only thing that people have to know about.
When you look at the strong relationships between nations, they provide assistance on a variety of different fronts. So some is economic assistance, some is defense assistance, some is law enforcement assistance. Mm-hmm. And so there's well-established agreements between nations around how they share evidence or how they collect evidence. And those are called the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaties, about how they go about that. And there's a large paperwork stream that is needed in order to do those things. And so we are strong proponents and advocates to make sure that governments leverage the legal assistance treaties to gain access to information and not do things unilaterally within nations. And so that is what we're advocating governments do to make sure that the privacy of our enterprise customers is protected.
Okay, so that really means that for any customers that's got data in there, whether or not the data is in the States and Canada, well, we don't have a data center in Canada at this point, or in anywhere else within our 19 regions, that they will be given the same protection and the same consideration regardless.
That's right. Again, it's customers' data. We don't have access to that data, and we want the governments to go to the customer to gain access to that information. We describe all these capabilities within our trust centers as well. And so one of the things that often comes out as we're having conversations with organizations about moving to the cloud is that we bring in multidisciplinary teams, so teams from across the business, be it compliance, risk, the legal team, the business team, the business team. I said the business team twice, didn't I?
Yeah, but sometimes there's more
sometimes
than one
more
team.
than one business team. And so they want to have a better understanding of how those services are provided. And in the past, way back when we first started, we had information spread out amongst a variety of different sites. Now we've collected those in one-stop shops. So they have the Office 365 Trust Center, the Azure Trust Center, which collects the privacy, the security, the transparency information in one place so that organizations can have confidence in those practices and procedures.
That's great. But that's not just for that. Well, that's for everyone. And for enterprises, for public sector, for mom and pop, for individuals that are using any of our cloud services. Correct?
That's right. So across the enterprise suite, those are the protections we provide in place.
So even a person that buys an Office 365 subscription for one person.
Correct. Those controls are in place for those people to have that information there. But we know that the threat's constantly evolving and that we have to keep abreast of the threat. And so we also have strong operational security assurance controls where we make sure that we're operating things in a very trusted fashion, that we learn from the evolving nature of the cyber threats and continue to keep abreast of those. The Security Response Center keeps abreast of common exploits, common procedures, and even actors that are out there that are trying to break into the system, so we can keep that step ahead of the bad guys to make sure that customers remain confident in how the information is protected. And I have to tell you, it's been very rewarding as we talk with enterprise customers across Canada, and they've indicated that their move to the cloud has actually increased the assurance of their IT environment. So when they took a look at their internal networks and how they run their services, they found that they increased, they had the same or increased the security assurances that were there. And one CIO actually mentioned that he could not afford all the safeguards and controls that were put in place that we've put in place within our cloud services.
Yeah, and again, I'm going back to that because our market is largely SMB, small and medium-sized businesses. For a small or a medium-sized businesses, affording all of those measures and countermeasures would be something that would be exorbitant.
That's right, and because we have such a presence, every month we see 600 million Windows machines as we do updates to those, or the malicious software removal tool executions, and get a sense of what's happening there. We get very familiar with what the current threat level is on the internet, and we're able to respond very proactively to those threats.
And we can finally remove that server from under the receptionist desks.
Exactly, and we get to keep it up to date because some people unfortunately are still running dated software. There's still one or two people running XP out there. Time to move from it, but as you move to newer versions of software, you get greater and greater resilience, and you get the benefit of being resilient against modern threats. And so the cloud helps with that.
Of course, remember that if you're running a VM in IaaS, you need to patch it.
That's exactly right. You need to manage the security of that environment.
But other than the patching and the networking, on the network and then storage and access, we're covering it.
That's right. That's right. Now, it's also interesting to note that we've gone an additional step. So in addition to being on the reactive side, so building out strong security controls, being effective advocates for our customers, and making sure their privacy is protected, and then as well responding to incidents. We're also being proactive with our digital crimes unit. So we're actually taking the fight in a different direction and making sure that we can shut down some of these bad actors that are working on the internet. And so we've brought together our crime-fighting units, so to speak, in the Microsoft Digital Crime Unit.
You have caps? You have capes too?
They have capes and boots, and they have this funky forensics lab with the glass wall. It's really quite a sight to see. If you get a chance, what they've done and been able to do with their forensic center is quite amazing. But these are the elite team that works out on the web to take down some of the more nefarious activities there. So they help stamp out child pornography and exploitation of children, illicit sharing of counterfeit materials and intellectual property theft, and increasingly it's that malware disruption. So getting rid of some of the viruses and more importantly of late as the botnets.
Okay.
There is a tremendous amount of traffic that is on the web that is simply botnet information. So these are zombie computers that are sending out spam, or sending out other zombies to infect computers and take advantage of unprotected machines. And so we have a dual-pronged approach in order to help rid the web of this scourge. The first approach is the technology approach. So we have demonstrated capability where we're able to disrupt the technology behind the botnet herders, those controller systems. Yep. And then we, like a 1-2 punch, we go in legally and we're able to take down some of those downstream servers. And we've done so across the board with botnets like Wildec, like Rustock, like Citadel, these large networks of zombie machines, so that we can
They're just waiting there for a command to do something.
Waiting there for a command. And sometimes these things are malicious machines for hire. Some people actually sell them for other people to do their duties. And so we're actively taking this activity back to the criminals so that we can prevent and change the way that they do their business.
Yep. And for the IT pros out there, remember that all of those facilities and all of those activities that we're doing to protect you doesn't stop your users from replying to that email saying that they've won $1 million and that they send their information. So when you send that email to someone who will take advantage of that information. So education is still a very, very strong point to make to fight cyber criminals and cyber attacks. So
you're exactly right. You're exactly right. As the infrastructure, as the tools have become more and more secure, they're looking for the weakest link, and often it's trickery. And trying to trick somebody to opening that attachment is often the path of least resistance.
Yes. It's the problem between the chair and the keyboard interface.
That's exactly it. And the last piece I think that's important to note is that this is not an activity we can do on our own.
No.
And so while we have a large cloud environment and a number of machines that are in there supporting customer business requirements, we work together with the community. So I mentioned law enforcement earlier to help the interdiction, but we also work with antivirus vendors, other security vendors within the community, intrusion prevention, intrusion detection, the analytics companies, the security analysts. We work with a broad range of people so that we can share information, so that people can be prepared for those threats. We work with governments around their security programs, around defensive aspects of security, so that make sure that they can be best advocates for their communities and their constituents. We provide policy and advocacy for communities, so that, again, it's a holistic, end-to-end security approach for services to make sure that our customers, you, can be confident in the way that the cloud services are provided.
And you, as the IT professionals in your environment, you are the best people that we have, that we can give that information to, so that when management comes back and says, hey, this is a business problem we're having, you're equipped to actually tell them, well, cloud computing may help that problem, and here are the response to the blockers that you've heard in terms of security and privacy and access to data.
Exactly, and it helps you then put the proper context around some of the threats we see out in the environment. On this slide, you'll see the security intelligence capability, and we're quite proud that we've published our 17th Microsoft Security Intelligence Report just last week. And that takes a global view of the global threat environment. So what malcode's there, what phishing sites there. This issue has an in-depth view of ransomware. So that's software that gets installed on a victim's machine and encrypts the hard drive, and then they try to extort the user to get the key to get the information back. So it has detailed information about that. And it also has very geographic specific. So we go across 20 different nations, and we provide snapshots of what's happening in that particular region. So as you, as an IT pro, can then put your local environment in the right context to understand, what's happening with the application space, the operating system space, the web space, and help then keep your CIO and ultimately the CIO comfortable.
See, it's funny how context sometimes makes all the difference.
You're exactly right. You're exactly right. It might be a challenge distant. Pickpocketing might be a problem in a big city, but in rural Canada, not such a problem.
No.
And so, I think just to recap, we are committed to being to protecting our customer data and making sure that our customers are always in control of their data. And we do that through adherence to our strong privacy principles and security principles. So that's baked into almost our DNA here at Microsoft.
It is in our DNA, and not only is it in our DNA, it's in our services, so our Microsoft Azure services or any other services, but it's also now for the last can't remember how many years now, with the Trustworthy Computing initiatives, it's actually baked into every product that we sell in a box.
Exactly. Any place where there's an attack
end-to-end.
surface area. That's right, end-to-end and formally reviewed. We build that into the platform. Our security expertise is recognized. Our security development lifecycle was recently adopted as an international standard, or an international standard was written that it recognized that our security development lifecycle adhered to that standard.
Yep.
And it's important to note as IT pros that the security development lifecycle was thought of and constructed in a day when we really had more of a waterfall approach to software development. We've now modified that to fit with the agile approach. And so as we're all building software in a new dynamic fashion, security development lifecycle fits in within that process. And so there's no need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We continue to follow those strong practices. And then lastly, we work as advocates in the global community, fighting cybercrime and working with governments so that we can quash those malicious activities.
That's fantastic. So we've looked at risk, trust, and confidence. We've looked at how our global security for cybersecurity and malware and all of that works. In the next module, we're going to dive deeper into what it actually means into the Canadian legislative template, or landscape, I should say.
Sure.
Again, we are not lawyers, so seek advice from your own legal departments. However, we'll look at to what the challenges, what the security and privacy certifications within the country are, the legal environments, and additional safeguards that we can look at. So why don't you join us in a few more minutes.